Okay, thank you for that introduction. So yeah, my research has been about sort of rewilding my work, although I don't like that expression, and you might have some more suggestions for me at the end of this talk. Kevin's already introduced me, so I shall whiz through this. The last sort of freelance work I've done is working with survivors of head injury, working with Headway, doing an 18-month art and writing project, which ended in a film showing brain injury survivors' work. That was a fantastic thing to do. Then 3 years ago, I began an MSc in creative writing for therapeutic purposes, because I was aware how much my own work was to do with my own well-being, how I was using my creativity for my own well-being, and I wanted to investigate this further. And it's been a fantastic experience. I've just finished it, and it gave me the space to experiment and to value process over product. And so this is the research that I'm discussing today. Oh, not a good start if I can't turn the slides on. Why is that not working? Oh, yes, it is. So what I wanted to do was to energize a 20-year-old art and writing practice through taking greater creative risk. I felt my work had sort of gone quite flat, that my writing was flat and that I wasn't sort of digging deep enough. People might laugh at this that know my work, but I felt also that there was an element of people pleasing in it. And maybe most creatives understand, how difficult that can be and how you really want to sort of throw that off. I wanted to mix art and writing for my research. I'd been at art school as a mature student, and I'd been told repeatedly that this couldn't be done. A piece of art should stand on its own and shouldn't need writing to sort of help it along. I always felt that that was wrong, and I disagreed with it. And I sort of wanted to prove that that might be a possibility for me. I knew that the art would come first, an image would come to me first, and that the stories would follow. So I found out about image work as a methodology. I hadn't done anything like this before because I come from an arts background. I've got MAs in creative writing and fine art. So doing a sort of science-based course was quite challenging for me. So I used image work, and the sort of people I looked at are Dina Gluberman, Ian Edgar, Robert Romanushin, Thomas, Nora Swan Foster, Mary Harrell. And the idea of image work, you may know this, but is to let go of ordinary ways of thinking and be led by a series of images. So after the research, I felt quite, that it was been incredibly useful to me. I had found sort of greater authenticity in my work and trust. And I love this quote by Thomas, sort of saying, instinct is several steps ahead of the reasoning mind. I always knew that creative risk was essential for my work, but again, I wanted to sort of remind myself of that, and maybe my findings will be useful for others and encourage risk-taking and playfulness. So image work, as I've said, is about letting go of usual ways of thinking and being led by a series of images that arise from the unconscious. Spontaneity and unexpectedness, hallmarks of the process, but this can throw you into a bit of a quandary. I think in the past, when I'd made artwork, I'd got several ideas, and I would then perhaps weed out the ones that seemed less practical or more silly. I would sort of censor them. But this time I decided, no, whatever comes up, I will make it, no matter if it's very childlike, if it's imperfect, if it's impractical, if it's downright stupid, I will do it. I will follow this idea. It's come up for a reason. So it was an exercise in silencing critical voices. And I think having worked in universities and doing MAs, wonderful things though they are, makes you very self-critical and critical of other people's work. And I wanted to get away from that place. So as soon as I started to trust the process, one thing fortunately flowed from another. So this was the first thing that I did, which is the washing up bowl fish. So I had this idea to make koi carp as if viewed from above. I made them out of acetate. I had to experiment with lots of different kinds of paint because some of the paint flaked off. And I put these fish, they're very, very imperfect. I put them into sort of strange positions. I went and photographed them in large puddles. I put them in the bath. I put them in all sorts of watery environments, but here they are in a washing up bowl. I wasn't quite sure what was happening. What are they doing in the washing up bowl? They could be disrupting, as you can see, I live in a mess, and they were obviously disrupting the domestic to a certain extent. But also, what were they doing in that small bowl? Would they prefer to be in a different environment? So I make the work, and then I have a conversation with it. So I have sort of had a conversation with these things, these fish. My next project is called the Rizzler novel. It's something I'm still working on. And another sort of quite absurd piece, pretending to write a novel on cigarette papers. If you try it, it's incredibly difficult because your fingers are too big. The paper's very fine. You have to have an incredibly fine pen to write on it. No one's going to write a novel on cigarette papers. And it was the nonsense aspect of it that really, really appealed to me. I've got some photographs of it in a minute. I've taught classes in writing on unusual surfaces in the past because it helps relax students and takes the pressure away. I think no matter how experienced you are as a writer or an artist, there's always a sense of fear when you face the blank page if you're starting a new project. But if you draw or write on unusual surfaces, such as tin foil, sand, steamed up windows, it takes away some of the pressure. And I'm interested in anything that takes away pressure so that people can make art in quite a free way. And it allows you to sort of let down your guard. I thought of the Rizzler novel as a sort of form of creative constriction. I've done classes before where people write on postcards, and very successful stories can come from postcards because you've got this limited space and a limited time, and also time when I can have all day to write and come up with nothing. If you tell me I've got 20 minutes, I'll come up with something perhaps a lot better than I would if I had a whole day. And I'm interested to know other people's experiences of that in a minute. So this is the Rizzler novel, or part of it. I explained just how difficult it was. The best way that I found to write in the end was a very, very sharp pencil. Of course, it's absolute nonsense, and it has sort of fairy tale qualities of an impossible task, because if you cough or sneeze, the novel is thrown into disarray. Chaos is there. And also, if you ever finish the novel, no one's going to read it. You can see here that I've numbered the pages, but quite how you'd put this together, and nobody could read it anyway because the writing's too small, the paper's too difficult to deal with. So that was one of my second pieces. I'm really interested in having the courage to follow our sort of ideas. And why don't we concentrate on our own images rather than those fed to us by social media? Swan Foster talks about our society being bombarded by images more than ever, and yet we ignore our own inner images. They're left unattended, but they offer us something, and she calls them guides on the path to transformation. I love that, and I believe it to be true. So if we're using our own images therapeutically, this is what I found, that I was working out what I needed to do in my life, how I needed to sort of reinvigorate my creativity by making these things like the Rizzler novel and the fish. So we can use our own images to make sense of our life. Bolton says, once an emotion has been pushed down, it won't come back in the same way, but the mind will offer it back in small pieces, a window, a code, pun, or metaphor. So I consider my work to be visual metaphors, which I've already said I then examine through having conversations sort of with the pieces or writing about them. I love the idea about multiple meanings. I don't like the idea that there's very sort of simplistic meanings to what I make. And I'm also prepared to think that the meanings may change over time. If I ask myself about the things that I make in a year, I might feel quite differently about them. And Sean McNiff and Bolton say there's no one meaning to any image. It's a case of exploring it rather than interpreting it. And I like that. I like the freedom in that. And I think, when you're working with students, I'd never try to interpret somebody's work. I would let them speak about it and tell me about it. So my next one is the dishcloth dress. And this has been made into a little film, which I hope will work. It was working this morning when I tried it. This is it. So I can't sew. So my friend made this dress out of 100 J-cloths. So when I was growing up in the 70s, this was the popular dishcloth of choice. Younger people might not recognize this at all. But I've always found them quite beautiful things. So I thought, let's make a dress out of it. This was made to a wedding dress pattern, and it's got this 3-meter trail behind it. And it was made to fit me with a little pearl button at the back of the neck. And it's incredibly difficult material to sew with. So my friend was cursing me having made this fantastic creation. And then I swam with it in a quarry. So the character that wears this dress walks into a quarry wearing the dishcloth dress. And it's a 25-meter deep quarry, which is sort of local to us. And it's beautiful, clear water. It's a spring-fed quarry. And I wanted to see how these dishcloths would move underwater, what would happen to it, what it would look like and what it would look like filmed. It sounds rather a strange thing to do, and I am 55, so I was incredibly embarrassed because I'm quite shy dressing up in a dishcloth dress and then going to do something as mad as this. But I wanted to sort of challenge myself and to encourage other people to do things, to see what will happen. So this is the train of the dress going into the water. I just got a few photographs of it. This is me in the water, so you can see how clear the water is. It's really, really glorious. And I did it. It was actually just a year ago that I did this. It was in October, so it was pretty cold, and I was used to cold water swimming at the time as well, but it was quite challenging. And I called it, there's a reason why people don't swim in dresses, because of course it's incredibly dangerous. It wraps around your body. You can't really swim in a dress. It's a very daft thing to do. I did have people in the water with me. It wasn't that daft. And there are lifeguards available at this quarry because it is a public swimming place. This is what happens when you swim in a dress. It rips. A dress won't accommodate the front crawl. So the whole piece started to fall apart, which was quite an interesting aspect of the whole adventure. So a lot of what I looked at when I was doing this research year is how to be creatively wild. It's such an important thing for me to push things and to get out of my comfort zone. There's no shortage of people that will tell us how to do this. Although she's talking about creative writing, I like Anne Lamott as a starting point. And she says, you just let this childlike part of you channel whatever voices and visions come through and onto the page. I love that she uses the phrase channeling, because that's what it feels like if you get an image up in your imagination and you make it into an art piece. It's as if you're not quite sure where it comes from. And Natalie Goldberg has an interesting thing to say about wildness. Let everything run through us and grab as much as you can with pen and paper. Let yourself live in something that is rightfully yours, your own wild mind. This is all about loss of control. Can you do this? Lose control and let wild mind take over. It's the best way to write. Again, she's talking about writing, but again, I use that in terms of making art as well. So I spent a lot of time looking up different terms for this loss of control that everybody talks about. And I've come up with the terms, these are the terms that it's written about in: loosening cognitive control, negative capability, image work, active imagination, imaginal dialogues, free writing, and shelving of the self. And I'm sure there's many, many others. Hunt and Sampson, I think, have got something interesting to say about what this loss of control could look like. So they say, in order to transpose our fantasies into art, we have to learn to operate on a precarious borderline. We have to be prepared to give up our familiar, everyday sense of ourselves, to relinquish, even if only temporarily, our reason, and to tolerate a state that may seem like a kind of madness or a kind of dreaming whilst awake, with all the potential hazards that involves. Of course, I had to think about the ethics of this when I was doing my research, and this talk about a state of madness. And I wondered about, how do you align this with teaching? I'm always really, really careful. We're all vulnerable. If you end up with vulnerable students, you have to be, you don't want to be encouraging people to go further than they would naturally or comfortably go with writing or art. And I don't have time to go into this, but I just want to mention, I really like the work of James Pennebaker and Louise DeSalvo, when they're talking about how to write safely. DeSalvo in particular talks about writing a healing narrative, so not writing stuff that will put you in a worse position in life, but writing things that will get you into a better place. And both Pennebaker and DeSalvo agree that it can't be like a peevish sort of lot of anger going out onto the page, not an angry explosion. That's not going to be healthy for anybody or healing, although there might be a place for that as well. But if you want to encourage people to do writing that's going to make them feel better, it's got to be detailed, rich, and coherent. So that's pretty much the end, apart from a very, very short film of if it works, of me sort of swimming in the dress, and a spoken word piece. Thank you very much for listening and letting me share some of my work. So I've looked at mixing art and writing, briefly talked about risk and danger. So the film that's come from this research has pushed me into a very different direction. So I've done this first film and started making another one. I've been incredibly lucky. At the weekend, I was down at the Women Over 50s Film Festival in Lewes near Brighton, and I was shortlisted and I've won a prize for this short film, which was an unexpected, very, very unexpected thing, especially considering it's the first thing like this I've ever done. So it's mercifully short if it works, and it's about 1 minute and 30 seconds long, but I want to end on this, okay? There's a reason people don't swim in dresses. I went to swim in a dress made of dishcloths, the kind of cloth that everyone used in the 1970s, with the familiar blue checkered pattern and a letter in front of the word cloth. Let's pretend that the letter was F, although it wasn't. 100 dishcloths were sewn together and the pieces were cut from a wedding dress pattern. I walked down scaffolding steps into the water. I don't know who or what I was marrying, maybe the water. The dress moved as naturally as blue checkered weed. It was beyond the dishcloth's wildest dreams to float in a stone-sided quarry 3 houses deep and not a washing up bowl. There's a reason people don't swim in dresses. The armpit seams rip when you swim. The 3-foot train wrapped around my calves, stopping forward movement. The cloth would rather drown me than return to an ordinary life.